The Ghostly Playground, A Tale of Terror. Gather round, young uns, and listen well, for I've got a tale that'll make your blood run cold and your hair stand on end. It's a story of darkness and spirits, of innocence lost and evil unbound. So pull up a chair, and mind you don't look over your shoulder, for in this tale, the shadows have eyes, and the night has teeth. Our story begins with young Tommy Alvarez, no more than 10 summers old, standing frozen before the rusty gates of the old playground. The setting sun cast long shadows across the swings and slide, painting them in hues of blood and rust. Tommy's mama, bless her heart, had no idea of the horrors that awaited her boy. "Go on, Tommy," she called from the car. "I'll just be a minute on the phone. Have yourself a little fun." But fun was the furthest thing from Tommy's mind as he stepped into that accursed place. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the air grew thick and cold, like the breath of a tomb. The swings creaked and groaned, though there wasn't a lick of wind to move them. And then, as the last light of day faded from the sky, Tommy saw them. Ghostly children, their eyes black as pitch, materialized on the playground equipment. They laughed and played, but their laughter was hollow, echoing like screams in a forgotten cave. One spirit, a boy no older than Tommy, floated up to him with a grin that'd make the devil himself shiver. "Want to play?" he asked, his voice like wind whistling through dead trees. Tommy ran, oh how he ran, his heart pounding like a drum at a funeral march. But the playground stretched and twisted, becoming a labyrinth of metal and rust. No matter how fast he fled, the exit remained just out of reach. It was only by the grace of God, or perhaps something older and stranger, that Tommy made it out that night. He flung himself into his mama's car, pale as a sheet and shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Goodness, Tommy," his mama exclaimed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." If only she knew, folks. If only she knew. Now, you might think that'd be the end of it, that young Tommy would put that night behind him and grow up to be a normal man. But fate, my friends, is a cruel mistress, and she wasn't done with Tommy Alvarez just yet. 10 long years passed, and Tommy, now a strapping young man of 20, found himself drawn back to that forsaken playground. The years hadn't been kind to the place. The metal was more rust than iron, and weeds had claimed much of the ground. But the evil that lurked there, oh, it was as strong as ever. This time, Tommy wasn't alone. He brought his sweetheart, Sarah, though it pains me to say he didn't warn her proper of what they might face. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood, they stepped into the playground. At first all was quiet, but then, as quick as a rattlesnake's strike, the horrors began anew. The ghostly children appeared, their laughter like breaking glass. The carousel spun of its own accord, its painted horses wearing grins that'd make your skin crawl. And there, in the center of it all, stood a figure that made even the ghosts seem friendly. Gregory Blackwood, the man who built the playground all those years ago. But he wasn't a man anymore, no sir. He was something else entirely, something that had no business walking God's green earth. "Welcome, children," Blackwood said, his voice like gravel in a meat grinder. "I've been waiting ever so long for you to join us." It was then that Tommy realized the awful truth. The playground wasn't just haunted, it was hungry. Blackwood had made a deal with forces best left unnamed, trading the souls of innocent children for power and immortality. Now I won't trouble your dreams with the details of what happened next. Suffice it to say, there was terror enough to turn a man's hair white, and bravery enough to make the angels weep. Tommy, with a courage born of desperation, managed to break the evil spell that bound the playground. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the ghosts faded away, finally at peace. Blackwood's spirit was dragged screaming into whatever hell spawned him. And the playground? It crumbled to dust and rust as if decades passed in mere moments. Tommy and Sarah stumbled away, holding each other tight, forever changed by what they'd seen and done. And as they left, Tommy could have sworn he saw the ghost of that first boy, smiling a smile of gratitude before fading into the morning light. Now, you might be tempted to think this is just an old man's tale, meant to frighten young'uns and keep them from wandering after dark. But let me tell you something, children. The world is a far stranger and more terrifying place than most folks realize. There are things lurking in the shadows, things that hunger for the innocent and the unwary. So the next time you pass by an old playground or hear the creak of a swing on a windless night, you remember old Tommy Alvarez and the ghostly playground. And maybe, just maybe, you'll think twice before stepping into the shadows. For in this world, my dears, not all that is lost should be found, and not all playgrounds are made for play. Now you might think that's where our tale ends, with Tommy and Sarah walking off into the sunrise, leaving behind nothing but rust and bitter memories. But life, my young friends, is rarely so neat and tidy. No, the story of the ghostly playground was far from over. You see, Tommy Alvarez couldn't just forget what he'd seen and experienced. Those memories haunted him like a bad dream that wouldn't fade come morning. He became obsessed, I tell you, absolutely consumed with uncovering the truth behind Gregory Blackwood and his accursed playground. Tommy spent his days poring over dusty old newspapers and town records, piecing together a history so dark it'd make the midnight sky look bright in comparison. And Sarah, bless her heart, she stood by him through it all, though I reckon she was more scared of what Tommy was becoming than any ghost she'd ever seen. It was on a night as black as a raven's wing that Tommy made his most chilling discovery. He found an old photograph, yellow with age and smelling of secrets long buried. It showed Gregory Blackwood on the day the playground opened, cutting a ribbon with a pair of shears big enough to fell a tree. But it wasn't the shears that caught Tommy's eye, no sir. It was Blackwood's eyes, dark as bottomless pits and filled with a hunger that no amount of innocent souls could ever satisfy. "Sarah," Tommy whispered, his voice shaking like leaves in a storm, "I think I know why Blackwood built the playground, and it's worse, far worse than we ever imagined." But before Sarah could respond, a cold wind howled through their little apartment, making the windows rattle like old bones. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness thick as molasses. And then, clear as day, they heard a knock at the door. Now I know what you're thinking. "Don't answer it," you're saying to yourselves, and you'd be right to think so. But sometimes, fate has other plans. Tommy crept to the door, quiet as a church mouse, and peeked through the peephole. What he saw on the other side nearly stopped his heart dead in his chest. It was the ghost boy from the playground, grinning that impossible grin that stretched from ear to ear. "Hello, Tommy," the boy's voice sang, seeping through the door like poison gas. "Wanna play?" Well, Tommy and Sarah did the only sensible thing. They ran like the devil himself was on their heels, which, truth be told, wasn't far from the truth. They scrambled out the window and down the old oak tree that grew alongside their building, the sound of childish laughter nipping at their heels the whole way down. They ran through streets dark as pitch, the town eerily silent, save for the echo of their footsteps and the ghostly giggles that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And where do you think their feet led them? That's right, straight back to the ruins of the old playground. As they stumbled to a halt at the rusted gates, panting like dogs in the summer heat, they saw a sight that had turned your hair white as snow. The playground, which had crumbled to dust before their very eyes, was whole again. The swings swayed in a non-existent breeze, the carousel spun with a cheery tune that sounded like a funeral dirge, and there, in the center of it all, stood Gregory Blackwood. But he wasn't the dapper gentleman from the old photograph, oh no. He was something else entirely, something that had no right to walk in our world. His form shifted and writhed like smoke in the wind, his eyes two pits of absolute darkness that seemed to drink in what little light remained. "Welcome back, children," Blackwood's voice boomed, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. "I knew you couldn't stay away. No one ever can. It was then that Tommy realized the awful truth. The playground wasn't just a place, it was a trap, a hungry maw always seeking its next meal. And they had walked right into it, like lambs to the slaughter. But Tommy Alvarez was made of sterner stuff than most, I tell you. With a courage that would make lions look like scaredy cats, he stood his ground. "We know what you are, Blackwood," he shouted, his voice stronger than he felt. "We know what you've done, and we're here to end it." Blackwood's laughter was like thunder, rolling across the playground and shaking the very stars in the sky. "End it?" he cackled. "Oh, my dear boy, this is only the beginning." And with that, the true nightmare began. Ghostly children materialized all around them, their eyes as empty as Blackwood's, their hands reaching out with icy fingers. The playground itself seemed to come alive, the metal groaning and twisting like a beast waking from a long slumber. Now, I won't trouble your dreams with the horrors that followed. Suffice it to say, there was terror enough to freeze the blood in your veins, and courage enough to warm the heart of the coldest cynic. Tommy and Sarah fought with everything they had, armed with nothing but love, determination, and the desperate need to end Blackwood's reign of terror. In the end, it came down to a single moment, a choice that would echo through eternity. Tommy, battered and bleeding, found himself face to face with Blackwood. In the monster's hands was a contract, signed in blood and sealed with dark magic. "Join us, Tommy," Blackwood crooned, his voice as smooth and tempting as honey laced with poison. "Think of the power you could have, the wonders you could see. All you have to do is sign." For a heartbeat, Tommy was tempted. The power Blackwood offered was real, and oh so very tempting. But then he heard Sarah's voice, calling his name, and he remembered why he was there. The cry that came from the very depths of his soul. Tommy lunged forward and snatched the contract from Blackwood's hands. And do you know what he did next? He tore it to shreds, each piece bursting into flame as it fell to the ground. The scream that tore from Blackwood's throat was like nothing of this earth. The playground shuddered and shook, the metal twisting and melting like ice in the summer sun. The ghostly children flickered and faded, their faces showing first shock, then relief, and finally peace as they disappeared into the ether.